last Thursday. It was probably a longer davening. Okay. Year of Learning, Sue and Arnie Gerlich, in memory of Malka Perlman and Philip Mann, and Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and Beryl ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and Yerivka Pearl Rosner bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust, Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Israel ben Harav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon, Sharon and Fred Lister, the family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbas Yaakov, Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Sudell, and Irving and Pearl Kaplan, friends of Avi Gidler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, and Martha Gidler, China Bas Yeshaya, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova Bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi Bat Yosef, friends Joe Wolf, Yosef Ben Chaim, the many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom Ben Yitzchak Halevi. A month of learning sponsored by Stanley Presser in memory of his wife, Chayalea Bat Ze'eva Cohen, by Mindel and David Cheslow, in memory of her mother, Shosha Bat Bear Leib, by Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her mother, Yita Bat Nachman Ben Yamin. A week of learning by Aviva Hochschender and Sulzberger and Vernon Sulzberger, in memory of her late husband, Ephraim Ben Yitzchak Aryeh, and her mother, Malka Bat Yischar. Marcia and Gary Schrager, in memory of her father, Shmuel Ben Meir. Lenny Bahar, in memory of her husband, Yitzchak Ben Menachem. And that is it. May the Shemas have an Aliyah, Crank Rafia, Belt Yeshir, Hashem Tzliah, and the Chol B'nai Israel, a good bench Yah. Okay. All right. I see Harvey is on and Steve is on. Okay. All right. Hopefully that will give Erwin and Ted, other than anybody else, a chance to get on as well. Okay. I believe we're on Mem Vav Amud Aleph, right?
Yes.
Sort of, right? Does that sound good, Marvin?
Yep.
Okay, sort of towards the top of the Amud, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Steve says, yeah. Amar Rabbi Eliezer Mishum Bar Kapara. Is that, does that sound
It's really
right? Right. Okay, just, okay, second line, actually on the Amud, okay? Amar Rabbi Eliezer Mishum Bar Kapara. Okay, it says in the name of Bar Kapara. Okay, we're talking about, again, remember those, I don't want to call them extraneous, but remember we said about the fact that there were pieces of offerings, fats, etc., that may have not been consumed on the main pyre, okay, main arrangement. What happened with them? Rabbi Meir was the one who said that he felt an additional pyre, additional arrangement of wood was made. So Rabbi Eliezer, Amar Rabbi Eliezer Mishum Bar Kapara, he said, Omer Haya Rabbi Meir. He would say, Rabbi Meir explained it this way. Evrei Olah Shenitot Kru. Okay, those parts of the burnt offering that remained. Okay. Oselehen maracha b'fnei atzma sodran, that one should make a separate arrangement of wood for them and arrange them on it to be burned, va'afilu b'Shabbat, and even on Shabbos. Now, interesting just side item as to whether this is an ongoing discussion in the Gemara or whether this is to be seen as let's call it a sidebar, okay, a transition. Why? Because the Gemara now picks up and discusses. Mai Kamashmalan, what is he coming, Bar Kapara, trying to teach us in terms of what Rabbi Meir is saying? Tanena, he says, let him teach the following. B'chol yom hayu sham arba marachot. We had said that Rabbi Meir seems to be indicating that on most days there were 4 arrangements of wood piles, right? And that therefore on Yom Kippur there's a 5th one, right? Amar Rabbi Avin lo nitzracha ela lepsulin. And Rabbi Avin says, no, what Rabbi Bar Kapar is trying to say is that what Rabbi Meir means is that that 5th pile of wood was only needed if there were certain kinds of offerings that had been disqualified, okay? That these, since they can't be put, okay, on the altar lechatchila, and if they had been put accidentally on the fire, then at least what should be happened, right, is that they need it. Nevertheless, they can't be taken off, so they have to be burned. If they're left over, they have to be burned elsewhere. The dafka, says the Gemara, shemashla behen or, and this applies particularly if the fire had begun already to consume these items. Okay, aval lo mashla behen or lo, but if for some reason the fire had not consumed these items, since initially they shouldn't have been put on the mizbeach, on the big arrangement initially, right? We don't have to deal with it. They don't have to be burnt. Now, ikada amri, and there were those who say, echad ksherin ve'echad psulin. They phrase it differently, and they say, what's the difference? There are those that are valid offerings and those that are disqualified offerings, right? Ein mashla behen ha'or. And if they're psul, and the fire has not consumed them, and yes, ve'im lo. And if the fire has consumed them, yes, they need them to be burnt. But if the fire has not consumed them, no. Now, Gemara wants to say, well, maybe that isn't what Bar Kapara is emphasizing.
Wouldn't that be
It's not-
difficult? Well, I can see the Gemara is talking that on Shabbos it would be difficult to burn the pasulim on Shabbos.
Good question, Marvin. And that really helps us lead into the next section of the Mishnah. Next section of the Gemara, Baruch Shekivanta, because the Gemara is going to say maybe Bar Kapara's whole discussion is not whether we're talking about valid or invalid offerings, but it's the Shabbat part. That's maybe what we're dealing with.
Right.
And so the next piece says the Gemara, right? Va'afilu b'Shabbat, where he said even on Shabbos, Tanena, okay, there, v'hayom chamesh, okay. But on the other hand, remember Rabbi Meir clearly said on this day, on Yom Kippur, we're talking about 5 arrangements of wood, right? So how could that be? Do we have that many occasions where Shabbat and Yom Kippur actually come out on the same day? I don't think it's that common.
That often.
It could happen, right? We're not saying it couldn't happen, but it can't
It's not
happen
often.
that frequently, right? And so therefore the implication is that the Gemara has to come back and tell us. So Amar Rav Acha bar Yaakov, eats tarich. Rav Acha bar Yaakov is saying, hold on a second. Bar Kapara's statement is really necessary. Saka da'ata chamina, because it's possible. You might have thought to say as follows: Hani mili, okay? These remarks, these words, Echad dechal yom ha'kippurim liot achar ha'shabbat. Okay? Maybe it was a situation where Yom Kippur came out on Sunday, right? And you had pieces, right? You had pieces of offerings that didn't get burned up on Shabbos, and so these have to be burnt.
But Yom
The
Kippur
Chelvei Shabbat,
Yom Kippur doesn't come out on Sunday.
yeah. What?
Yom Kippur can't come out on
let's-
Sunday, can it?
That's now, because we have a set calendar, right? The Chelvei Shabbat Krevin B'Yom Kippurim, because he's arguing maybe these leftover items would need to be burnt on Yom Kippur, right? Aval be'emtza Shabbat, but on Shabbat itself, in the middle of the week, lo, kamash malan. Therefore, Bar Kapara is going to teach us that Rabbi Meir's statement does apply in all situations, in all cases. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, we come to a new statement here where somebody is commenting on this discussion. Okay. Amar Rava. The Rava now says, Man hai delo chiesh lekimche. Who is the person that does not care about his flour? Now that sounds like a very strange statement, but I'm going to call it probably more a colloquial expression. In other words, it's the same way people are concerned about the quality of their flour for their bread, since that was a staple. Who are we talking about here that's not concerned about the essence of this discussion? Ha b'chol yom taneh. Why shouldn't our focus be not so much on the Shabbat issue, but on the fact that he says this is something that on other days, it's very clear that according to Rabbi Meir, there's 4 pyres, and on Yom Kippur, it's a 5th. Right? Ha b'chol yom taneh kasha. And therefore, that's why there's a difficulty here, okay? Because it's difficult in the sense, okay, that there doesn't seem to be any solution, whether positive or negative, to how to understand why, what Bar Kapara is really trying to convey in terms of Rabbi Meir's statement. So we come back. So the Gemara now tells us, Upliga de Rav Huna, okay, that it would seem then that both Rava and Bar Kapara, okay, seem to have this disagreement. Da'amar, and they say, Techilato, okay, that if we're talking about offerings that did not get consumed on Yom, okay, in general, a daily offering, and that has to be burnt according to Rabbi Meir, that burning is going to take place on Shabbat as well. And therefore, what's the implication? Okay, docha, sofo. Okay, the implication is that this seems to disagree with something that Rav Huna had said earlier, namely that once a big surface, once the avoda of the daily basis had begun, and that means the slaughter, the collecting of the blood, the sprinkling of the blood, all of that, okay? Once all of these steps have been undertaken, and if you still have pieces of offering that haven't been totally consumed, all those things are doche Shabbat. However, sofo, something that might occur at the end of the process. In other words, if you might be saying that if the burning of, let's say, leftover parts of the animal, that really is no longer part of the regular avoda of the morning service. It's sort of extraneous. And if it's extraneous, because you've already done the slaughter, you've done the blood in terms of its collection, you've done the sprinkling, all of those things which are clearly parts of the avoda. And those, so simply to burn what's ever left over of the animal, well, that is not doche Shabbat. Ain't no doche.
Why the burning actually overrides halacha?
Well, ask your question in another way, Steve. Okay? Does the burning override Shabbat? That's what seems to be the
Right,
question.
that's the question, right?
Right? Is if we see that the burning of leftover parts of the animal, do we consider that part of the steps of the avoda, and therefore it would be doche Shabbat? Or do we consider it leftover, okay, and therefore not part of the direct ritual, let's say, of the avoda, of the different steps, and as a result, then it should not doche Shabbat.
Right.
Okay? So what happens? The Gemara comes back and says, let's analyze this in more detail. Gufa, let's look at the text itself. Amar Rav Huna, this is Rav Huna, Tamid, when it comes to the Tamid offering, the daily offering, right? Tchilato, its initial steps, I'll say it, use that phrase, okay? Right? Docha does take precedence over Shabbat. Sofo, its conclusion, eno doche. It does not doche Shabbat. Now, so the Gemara asks, Ma'i no dochet? What does Rav Huna mean when he says that these concluding steps or final step of burning left over, remember, that's what we're talking about, leftover pieces, right? What does it mean when we say it doesn't? Rav Chisda Amar says, Rav Chisda, dochet ha-Shabbat ve'eno dochet ha-Tumah. Okay, that fine, it may override Shabbat, but that doesn't tell me, okay, that, right, that it overrides halacha and regarding putting pieces of meat for the ceremony of the burning that might be tameh, that might be ritually impure. Okay? Varava, and we assume it's Rava now responding. Amar, he also says, dochet hatumah ve'eno dochet haShabbat. His view is just the opposite, that the end of the service, okay, does override issues of ritual impurity, but it doesn't override the issue of Shabbat. Now, Abaye tries to respond. Amar le Abaye, we assume here to Rava, Vididach kasha. Okay, your view is difficult. Rav Chisda kasha, and even Rav Chisda's view, he says, is problematic. Vididach kasha, your view is problematic. Why? Maishna tuma. What's different about an offering and it's being brought in a state of ritual impurity? Dichtiv b'moado, because we have as an example in the Torah text that says there are times when an animal must be brought at its appointed time. Va'afilu b'tumah, even when it's tameh. Right? Remember, we learned that with regards to, Korban Pesach. Right? I think everybody will remember that had to be brought, even if the animal was tameh, even if the Kohen was tameh, it had to be brought for its appointed time. Shabbat nami, here too, Shabbat also, b'moado. There too, with regards to Shabbat, we find in the pasuk that it says in its appointed time, va'afilu b'Shabbat, even for Shabbat. Now, as far as Rav Chisda goes, says Abaye, still raising a challenge. Rav Chisda kasha, and Rav Chisda, it's also a problem. Ma'ishna Shabbat tichtiv b'moado. He's just going to flip it now. Regard Shabbat, there we said it's written at its appointed time. Afilu b'Shabbat, even if it has to be brought on Shabbat. Tumah nami b'moado, va'afilu b'tumah. Regarding its status of being impure, we know there are also times there too that it has to be brought at its appointed time. Amarle, and so Rava tries to respond. Lo lididi kasha, it's not a problem according to my view, my opinion. Lo the Rav Chisda kasha, and according to Rav Chisda, there's no problem either. Lididi lo kasha, according to my view, there's no problem. Why? Sofo, ketchilato. Why? Because the end of the series of acts has the same status as the beginning of the series of acts, namely burning these extra leftover pieces is no different than is part of the avoda steps, and therefore the same way the earlier steps are doche Shabbat, this also is doche Shabbat. Okay? And if we go on to the next Amud, Tumah detchilato bar midcha tumahu. And therefore, okay, we can also say here too, that since there are situations where when the animal is impure, ritually tameh, okay, it still needs to be brought. Sofo nami dache. And therefore at the end also, it would have to be also override the prohibition of impurity. Shabbat, the tchilato, love bar midcha Shabbat. But whereas we can say, right, that in regards to Shabbat, it's not appropriate to override Shabbat, sofo nami lo dache. Then therefore here too, its end act is also not appropriate to override Shabbat. And now, the Rav Chisda lo kasha. And it's also, we said, no problem for Rav Chisda. Sofo ketchilato litle. Okay, Rav Chisda, however, does not hold, like Rava, that the burning of these leftover parts, is similar to the beginning of Vodot. Shabbat, the Hutra, Ibet Sibur, right? Because the Shabbat prohibitions, okay, are not overridden in regards to a communal sacrifice. Sofo nami dache. So therefore the end part also, okay, we can say there too, right, that if it's an individual sacrifice, it's one thing. But that when it's a communal sacrifice, Shabbat dehutra hid betzibur, that for communal sacrifice it's permitted, therefore the act also is permitted on Shabbat as well. Now, Tumah, in regards to Rav Chisda's attitude towards Tumah, the dechuya hi betzibur, but Tumah, ritual impurity, okay, which usually is overridden in a communal offering. Tichilato deikar kapara. There we say that the first acts, the beginning, okay, is essential as an act of atonement, and therefore dache, it does override prohibitions. So fo, the love ikar kapara, but right, because the later act, burning what these leftover pieces, the atonement process is already taken care of by having caught and sprinkled the blood. And therefore, these other items are not part of atonement, and therefore they do not override tumah. Okay, so let's go on. Itma. Now it was said also in regards still to the whole business of the fire on the altar. It was said, Hamechaber Eish Machta Umenorah. What about the fact that we say that we have to deal with the question of fire on the Mizbeach regarding the fire for the coal pan and the fire for the menorah, for the lamp? Abaye Amar, Abaye said, right, that the fact that it says that there has to be a perpetual fire, okay, and that doesn't go out, okay, how does that may apply fine for the big arrangements or some of the smaller arrangements, but how does that apply on Shabbat, let's say, to the coal pans or the lamps, okay? Maybe what happens that when one is trying to gather the coals, that he extinguishes that. Okay? So Abaye says then the person would be chayav. Rava says the person would be patur. Now, Gemara comes back to try to clarify. If it's a case, suggests the Gemara, that one extinguishes the coals that are on top of the Mizbeach, the Kuli Amalo Plige Dechayev, then everybody is in agreement that the person is liable, that they're Chayev. Ki Plige, where do they disagree? Da'achte A'ara the Kabaye, that he's taken the coal pan with the coals in it, come down now off the ramp, and then they become extinguished. And it goes out there. Abaye Amar Chayav. Abaye there says that he's guilty. Eisha Mizbeach. Why? Because it says there's supposed to be Eisha Mizbeach, this eternal fire in relation to the altar. Rava Amar Patur. And Rava says he is exempt. Why? Kevan denitka. Because once he has taken it off the Mizbeach, come down the ramp, and now on the ground level, nitka, it's been removed. Right?
But your observation, Rob,
What?
your observation though is different. You actually suggest the possibility of when he was removing that individual, removing the coals from the altar on the top, he accidentally goes and extinguishes the fire. This doesn't deal with either of those situations.
Well, I thought of it as he's taken the coals, right, from the second malacha, and as he comes down the ramp, right, by the time he gets to the bottom of the ramp, ground floor, the coals have gone out.
But you actually said that while he's removing the coals from the top of the altar, he accidentally disturbs the fire and puts it out when he's up there.
Oh, that's different.
That's
There,
different issue, yeah.
right, that's the difference. There, The
Right.
Gemara has already told us if when he's sort of shifting right, getting it, because he needs a utensil to take the coals,
Okay,
right, off and put it into the coal pan. If that results in his extinguishing, then sure, everybody's going to say he's chayiv.
Right.
There's no machlok.
Right.
Okay? Yeah, that's what it said. The kavye berosho shel mizbeach. Okay, if it extinguished it on top. Okay. So what happens? Elahada amar Rav Nachman. But what about what Rav Nachman says? The Gemara tells us. Amar Rabba bar Avuha, in the name of Rabba bar Avuha. Hamorid gachelet me'al gabei hamizbeach v'chiba. One who takes a coal from the altar and it becomes extinguished is what? Chayav, is liable. Keman, according to whom? Ke'abai, like Abai's view. Afilu tema karava, says the Gemara. No, hold on. You might even think it'd be according to the view of Rava. Why? Hatam lo intik lo mitzvata. Because perhaps he did not take it for fulfillment of the mitzvah. Okay? Hacha intika le mitzvata. But here, okay, where in the dispute between Abai and Rava, the coal was taken for the purpose of a mitzvah. And if it's associated with a mitzvah, then maybe it does not have to be identified as Eish HaMizbeach, right? In other words, what is he taking it? He's taking it to go, because remember what was our initial question? What about the lamp? What about the menorah? That's the point. But the Gemara picks up as we continue to finish up. Ika de Amre. And there are those who say there's a different version of this dispute. The Ach Te'ara Lechabye, that he brought the coals down to the ground level and they were extinguished. The Kuli Amalo Pligi de Pator, that everybody is in agreement there that in that situation he's exempt. Kipligi, whether they disagree, the Chabai Berosho Shel Mizbeach, that he extinguished it on the top of the altar. Abai Amar Chayav, Abai says he's guilty. Libel of Eish HaMizbeach, because we're dealing with fire on the altar. Rav Amar Patur, Rava says he's exempt. Kivan de Nitka, Nitka, because once he's removed it from the altar, it's removed and no longer part to be considered Eish HaMizbeach. Elahad Amar Rav Nachman. But the Gemara says, what about this ruling that Rav Nachman says? Amar Rabba bar Avuha, in the name of Rabba bar Avuha. Hamorid gachelet me'al gabei mizbeach v'chiba chayav keman. That one who brings a coal from off the altar and it becomes extinguished is liable, according to whom? Loke Abai v'loke Rava. In this case, in this lashon, right, it would be neither according to Abai nor according to Rava. Hatam lo intik mitzvata. There, says the Gemara, it's a situation that he did not take it for the purpose of a mitzvah. In tata, here remove it to fulfill a mitzvah. And therefore, again, it's not considered Eish HaMizbeach, where the result would therefore be, right, that he would be not be held liable. Adranalach teref b'kla abai. Thus we end the chapter, okay, on the lottery, okay? So hopefully I will try tomorrow to continue with Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, okay? And we'll see, I'll try hopefully on Sunday too, okay? Monday, I'm doubtful, okay? Since I'll be on an airplane and I don't think it will work then, okay? So, all right, so hopefully tomorrow we'll tune in. If we can do it, we'll do it. All right.